This next podcast is part of a 3-part series in which we discuss implicit bias, critical race theory, and racism and discrimination in the fire service. Although these topics can be controversial, our intent is never to be divisive. I'm joined by Deputy Chief Emily Jaramillo, who is now Fire Chief Jaramillo by the time you're watching this podcast, and also the first female fire chief in Albuquerque Fire Rescue's history. She is joined by Timothy Green, who is the City of Albuquerque's cultural change leader. We hope you learned something from this. We encourage self-assessment, self-awareness, and as always, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment. Thank you. Today, I have 2 guests, and we're going to be talking about a very complicated, maybe even controversial topic, right? But the point of this is to get educated, right? The topic will be implicit bias, and I'll pause for a second to let that sink in, everybody, and you can react however you need to. But yeah, it's implicit bias. Just a little context. This is a piece of legislation that comes from Mayor Keller's office, right, here in Albuquerque, New Mexico.
Yeah.
And this is R2075. And it basically says that all city departments will receive training about implicit bias, right? And just like, with the fire department, people heard this, I heard it, and I had some preconceived notions of what implicit bias is, but I had no formal education or training, and so we thought it would be effective to start that off. So on my left, I'd like to introduce Tim Green. And Tim, please tell us who you work for and just a brief history of yourself.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful. So happy to be here. Thank you, John.
Yeah.
Good to see you, DC Jaramillo. Like you said, my name is Timothy Green IV, and I'm Culture Change Leader here for the City of Albuquerque.
Culture Change Leader.
Culture Change Leader.
Gotcha.
Specifically, I work from the Office of Equity and Inclusion.
Okay.
Right, and there we have 3 outward-facing offices: the Office of Native American Affairs, the Office of Black Community Engagement, and then the Office of Immigrant and Refugees. And so what we're tasked with doing is helping those communities access resources, government help in any way, and then also to help our own city workforce to practice equitable anti-racist practices within the city. And this means, the boogeyman word DEI, or EDI, diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Right. When you say that, like you said, we'll pause again.
Right. Let that sink.
Let that sink. Right. This term is politicized, right? Yeah. And there's an industry, and we'll get to that, and I understand that. But my job is not so much DEI, but it's to really look at the culture of discrimination. Okay. And how we, as a workforce within the city of Albuquerque, can make this more inclusive for everybody.
So what qualifies you to provide this training? And then real brief, because I want to introduce our other guests too.
Yeah. So I guess right now I'm working on my PhD in language, linguistics, and sociocultural studies.
Gotcha.
I have a bachelor's and master's in political science and Black studies, Africana studies. Within that, I have been blessed to teach and train internationally within intercontinental Europe and then parts of Latin America. And this is what I do. I think it's a combination of my lived experiences, my educational background, and then my work experience. And I think it qualifies me in this position.
Excellent.
So, yeah.
Excellent. Okay, and to my right, and you guys, we all know her, but for our viewers that maybe don't know her, this is Emily Jaramillo. Please, Emily, just a little bit about you and your position here at Albuquerque Fire Rescue.
Sure. Thank you. So my name is Emily Jaramillo, Deputy Chief of Emergency Services at Albuquerque Fire. So I oversee all of our emergency medical services, firefighter health and wellness, safety office, all fall under me. I've been with the department almost 18 years and have been doing this job for about 5 years.
Right. Now, I want to point out that you are a deputy chief. So you're here at the administration, right? You work right with the fire chief. You're the executive administration with the mayor's office. So I think for R2075, you have been tasked with, you're kind of like the liaison now, right, between the Office of Equity and Inclusion, and you are responsible to, I guess, devise a plan to introduce this to the department. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, that's fair to say. We were asked by city administration to roll this training out. And personally, I feel like this training is very important, and the way that we roll it out is important, so that everybody learns something. And so I'm very honored that I get to be in this role to help coordinate with the Office of Equity and Inclusion and Tim to get this out to the department.
I'm glad you brought that point up. So from an administrative point of view, and also because you didn't start off in administration, right? You started off a firefighter like all of us. You went through the academy. You recognize the need for this training in our particular department.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, I did start as a firefighter, worked my way up through the ranks, and have worked in the fire station, have worked in training. I think as an administration, anytime there's a mandate, like you're going to roll this training out, you have to roll this training out. I think that automatically that makes people apprehensive for the training. And it makes it easy also to put out training that's just checking a box. Like, it would be very easy for us to put out some training to coincide with this legislation and say that we did it.
Right.
And then it may not get across to anybody. They may not learn anything. It may not make a difference in our department for our firefighters that are working in the stations, living in the stations. And so I think it's important as an administrator to show that, like, we want more than just checking a box. Like, we want this training to be authentic. We want it to be something that is respectful of our culture as firefighters, but also identifies the issues that we have within our department that we need to grow from. So that's a key
point, right? So we do have some issues, right?
Absolutely.
That center around some of this implicit bias. So, Mr. Green, I'll go back to you. So I'm going to ask questions because, ever since word got out that we were going to roll this training out, people have been calling and I've been getting some reactions, right? One of them is, why do we need this? Mm-hmm. Right. Another one is, isn't implicit bias just critical race theory, right? This is what I'm hearing. And the other one is, implicit bias really is just another way of saying all white people are racist. Okay. So can we start with the first one? A, why do we need this? Okay. Do we need it?
Okay, absolutely.
Here in the fire service, and AFR in particular.
So we'll start there. Do we need it?
Please.
Yeah, I think it's, I want to honor those questions first and foremost. Okay. Because those are all valid questions. And I also want to honor that what's happening here is powerful. Because usually what happens within America, when we talk about race, racism, anything that's controversial, there's a culture of silence, right? If you speak out, you become ostracized, you become a pariah. We don't talk about race or racism. We live in a post-racial society. Meritocracy, America's equal, what are you talking about? These are all some of the basic immediate responses, right, when we talk about this. And so I'm glad that we're even breaking the culture of silence. And so as we establish that clear analysis, I think it's important to say that, yes, it's needed. And for me, I would go just straight to the statistics. Okay. Right? And if we just look at the national statistics, 96% of firefighters are men, right? Because we're talking about equity and discrimination, right? Anti-racism.
So it's not just race. No. It's equity and discrimination.
Exactly. And I think it's really important that we move past what happens. So W.E.B. Du Bois, a very famous scholar, he has this concept called the color line. And basically it's the idea that race is a social construct and that it's been built over time within institutions, within individuals, socially, and that unfortunately people get stuck in their racial identities, meaning that they can't move past those stereotypes. And so it's important that we, as we build this analysis, can come together and build a common language and understanding moving forward as we diagnose the problem in the analysis. And
so the language is important, right?
Without a common language and an analysis, we don't have to agree.
Right.
We have to have the language.
We got to define the terms.
We have to define the terms and be very clear on those terms because and if we're not, miscommunication occurs.
And that's what I think might be happening.
I think there's a lot of miscommunication, right? We live in a society that's anti-historical. Not ahistorical, but anti-historical. And we're seeing it all across the country. And that's for later. But I want to say here, if we just focus in, like I said, 96 of firefighters are men. Right? When we're talking about discrimination, we're not just talking about race. That's what I'm getting at. We're not just stuck in our racial identities. Okay. Right? What about those part of the LGBTQ community? right?
As far as their representation in the fire service?
As far as the
I would
representation
imagine
in the
it's
fire
probably pretty low.
Absolutely. Especially openly, outward.
Oh, absolutely.
Right? We're talking about trans, identifying women and men, right? We're talking about socioeconomic status. And so as we start to break this down and build an analysis, it's really important that we have a common language that we understand, and that understanding that this isn't just about racial ethnicity and racial background. There's a lot more when it comes to discrimination. So first and foremost, I think it's important we start there. And then I would continue to say 5% of the fire force around the country is only female, right? And then from there, 13% are Latino, Latina, Latinx, 8% are Black African American, 1.2% are career Asian, and then and these demographics are coming from the U.S. Fire Department Profile 2020 statistics. And then if we come to Albuquerque, those statistics are also pretty glaring. Out of 750 people in 2002
In AFR.
Yeah. Right, only 19 of them identified as Black or African American, right? Only 10 of them identified as Asian. Only 20 identified as Native American, even though we have 24 indigenous pueblos and reservations, the largest of any place in America in terms of, right? And then 2 or more races, and then Native Hawaiian, there's only 6. And that's out of 750. And then if we look at the Hispanic Latino, there's more representation, 388.
Yeah.
White Anglo-Saxon, 290. And so I think the conversation needs to be had, because if we just look at the numbers itself.
But can I push back, Tim?
Exactly, yeah, push back.
So for a person that's going to work every day, they're going to listen to all that and they're going to say, so what?
Absolutely.
Why does it matter? Right?
Absolutely.
People just come. We just need people to get on the trucks, run the calls. Doesn't really matter what color their skin is. And maybe blacks and natives don't want to apply.
Yeah. And again, that's maybe. We'd have to look at the statistics and the data to have data-driven solutions and answers and understand the problems to say who is applying. Yeah. Is there community AFR outreach to communities of color? And if so, why aren't they wanting to be firefighters? What's the culture here? Again, it's not about the color line, right? We're here not talking about the individual. We're talking about a culture, right? And even though individuals uphold that culture within those institutions, we're not here to attack individuals. We're here to focus on that culture and how we can improve it.
Okay, so let's go with that line of thinking. So we've answered the first question. Why do we need this? Right? We've established that there's some questions that need to be answered, right, in the realm of why we need this.
And I want to just make this side note.
Yeah.
My respect for firefighters is of the utmost. My mother was a firefighter.
Didn't know that.
No, I fucking don't. For about 8 to 10 years. My stepdaddy was a firefighter.
Wow.
Very powerful, influential man. And what we're saying is not...
And you've trained some firefighters, I heard.
Yeah.
Because you have a
boxing background.
You have a boxing background.
Yeah.
Right?
Y'all used to do Rumble in the Rio?
Yeah, we used to do Rumble in the Rio where we'd fight cops.
Yeah.
Trained my classmate,
right?
Ralph Waddles.
Absolutely.
Right.
I trained Ralph Waddles over a decade ago. And Ralph won, of course, because, we trained him.
Trained by the best, yeah.
Yeah. I was Golden Glove champion 2 years running, 2008, 2009, 2010,
okay,
2011.
so you're not just some academic that...
No.
Okay.
Like I said, I think my lived experience gives me a unique understanding of the culture. And of course, I'm not part of the culture, right? Yeah. But I'm part of a fraternity. And I know that firefighters is a fraternal, and more recently, also a sorority, right? There's a fraternal and sorority order. Yeah. So I like I said, even though I'm not part of the culture, there's some similarities that I understand within the culture.
Gotcha.
So
I'm glad you said that. So go ahead. I'm sorry.
And I just want to add too, that's what I appreciate working with Tim on this project is that when we met early on, when it was just he and I, when we first started rolling tackling this, is he was very receptive to just listening about firefighter culture. And so that's one of the things that I appreciate as we move forward, that a lot of it, the first meeting was him just listening to me talking about our department and all the great things about our firefighters and our culture. And then also some of the challenges that we have that we want to try to address as we go through this.
You know what, Emily, that's a really good point. And I guess from your vantage point, you hear it all, right? The issues that we have, because it all has to come to your office. Do we need this training? Do we have these issues in our department?
We do.
Racism, gender discrimination. So you're saying it does exist?
It does exist.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, because a lot of people may not know this, right? If I'm at Station 3, my world's pretty small, right? I don't know what's going on with the other 22 stations or whatever. I don't know what happens up here on the Hill at admin. So I may be somewhat removed, right? So when I hear this training, I'm like, what are you talking about? All the guys at Station 3, we get along great, right? But that doesn't represent the entire department. So,
and my question would be like, do all the guys at Station 3 look like you?
Potentially.
Right?
Right.
I think it's just important to ask those questions, right? Like, even though you don't experience doesn't mean it's not real. And that's part of privilege. Right? Like, I don't experience it. I don't got to worry about that. That's part of privilege.
Ooh. See, now I'm going to open the can. Okay, so, but the second question, what was my second question? It was,
what is implicit bias? I think you was asking. Or
yeah, well, why not? Let's go there. What is it?
Okay. This is a good question, right? So I want you to close your eyes.
Literally?
Yeah, I really want you to close your eyes.
All
I'm
right,
going to do
guys,
something right quick. Everybody close your eyes.
Close my eyes.
In the back, everybody close your eyes. And
All
I'm going
right.
to do something, and I want you to tell me what comes to mind.
All right.
And I'm not really good at singing, but this is the Jaws, right? This is the Jaws intro.
That's what came to my mind.
Really?
Yes.
I don't know why I was thinking
I
Batman.
thought it was going to be
That
wrong.
might be it too.
I was going Batman, but okay.
So it's the Jaws, right? And everybody can laugh at me. Like I said, I'm not a singer.
All right.
What came to mind for y'all when you heard that?
Well, when I heard it, it reminded me of that old Batman show that used to come on. That took me back kind of like to my childhood.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That wasn't my intention, but you heard Jaws.
I heard Jaws.
Okay, what came to mind?
My son randomly last year just was obsessed with the movie Jaws.
Mm-hmm.
And so I let him watch it, which maybe was good, maybe it was bad. I didn't realize how poorly made that movie
somewhat
was.
traumatizing, but
so
okay.
in my mind, I pictured a shark
Good.
swimming through the water with its mouth open.
Absolutely.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Good. Make me like Batman and the shark, but I was going for the shark, not Batman.
All right.
So let me tell you something. So the CDC has a characteristic on everything that lives, right? Snapping turtles, cows, sharks, monkeys. If we look at the statistics, what do you think kills more people, snapping turtles, cows, or sharks?
Well, on the outside, you would look at lethality, right? Which of those is most lethal? So you think sharks, but we don't have a lot of interaction. So I'm going to guess cows.
Yeah, it's cows, right? But in the headlines, it's shark attacks.
Right.
It's sharks are demonized, right?
Yeah.
We never say, oh, y'all better watch out for all them cows.
Right.
They're going to kill you.
That's true.
Right? And I'm making a point here that implicit bias is an attitude towards people or things, an association to that stereotype without them having a conscious knowledge of it. And I think where I'm trying to go with this is that when we think about race, ethnicity in this country, who are the sharks? Who have been historically deemed to be the sharks?
The dangerous people,
The dangerous people.
black people, black men in particular.
Black men,
Yeah.
black people, right? And then through the evolution of this country as it evolved, different folks throughout different time periods were deemed more dangerous than others, and blah blah.
Sure,
blah.
because I know there was a time through colonialization that Native Americans
Absolutely,
were, right?
Savage.
Yeah.
Absolutely, and that's their term, not mine, right?
Right.
Barbarian, savage. This is how the state, the church defined them. And what I'm getting at, that's what implicit bias is, right? It's this unconscious association with something that is dangerous or living into a stereotype that's usually negative, pejorative, without you unknowingly doing it.
But you know what just jumped into my mind, though?
What's that?
When you said that, I pictured some of our audience members, then they would say, I'm Irish, and my great-grandfather came to this country, and they were a pariah at the time, right?
At the time.
Right? They were segregated and not considered Americans, whatever,
yes.
right? Until whatever they changed, or Italian, or whatever it is.
Yes.
So you're going to have some people that are going to say, it wasn't just you,
Of course not.
right?
Of course not. And
My
that's-
people, too, and I'm white.
Okay, and that's part of the racial identity that people are stuck in, right? Because racism affects both people of color and white people.
Mm-hmm.
It just affects white people less,
Gotcha.
right? It affects black people more,
Right.
right? And so, of course, the Irish came and they were treated like hell.
Yeah.
Before Anglo-Saxon European colonization happened in the Western Hemisphere, they were doing it to the Irish for 700 years.
Right.
They took away their language, their culture, they starved them out, and it was horrible.
Right.
That's why many of them came here. After the Civil War, they fought and they gained their nationality and their independence, right? And then they were assumed into the social construct of white.
Right.
And they still went into these areas in Chicago and the East, and they're still Irish. They're still segregated.
Boston, all
Right?
that. Yeah.
But it wasn't until integration that they didn't have to worry about their nationality or their ethnic identity because now they were white. The focus was on anti-segregation against the blacks.
Right.
And so of course, they came, and like I said, racism affects everybody.
So we do acknowledge that.
We have to.
Gotcha.
Right? And I think and going back to this, we can go back to Bacon's Rebellion when we talk about, when we build this analysis around race, the racial construction around this country. You go back to Bacon's Rebellion, in the 1600s, slavery was just happening, right? It's not until 1619 you get here, and it's indentured whites and blacks, right?
Yeah.
And it's not until about 1662 where you start to see Virginia codes start to then say that slavery is hereditary based on skin.
So you're born into it.
You're born into it, right?
Yeah.
They start to tax black women's bodies.
Right.
Right? And prior or a little bit after this, right, let's see, Bacon's Rebellion is right here, 1675, 1676. You have white indentured servants, blacks, Native American, indigenous people, all coming together to fight the crown, right? And this is a beautiful showing early on that race really wasn't even a construct, but it's after this rebellion, when you get into the punishment, where it starts to be solidified because blacks are punished at the harsher. Whites are punished less harsh. Native Americans in the middle. So it starts to embed and codify this idea of what race is and how it's going to be legislated, how it's going to be enacted socially. And so it's really important.
How do we connect that to implicit bias now, 2023?
Good.
Because people will put distance between that, right? They'll say that was so long ago.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely. And so it's the evolution. I think we have to go slow as we build this analysis, but it's the evolution of those biases within our institutions, right? So you say, how does that affect us now in 2023? If we just look at the long history of segregation within fire departments, there's still legacies of those structural barriers. That's why we're only seeing 19 black folks here. That's why we're seeing.
Now, is that related to the population here in town?
So that's a good question.
We hear that all the time.
We hear that, right?
Good.
Because we're going to say we're only 2% of the population here.
Right. And so this is important, right? You have to put it in perspective. So in the greater Albuquerque area, I think there's around 24,000 black identifying African-American folks in the greater Albuquerque area.
In the city's 900, maybe, metro? 100,000?
Yeah, I believe so.
Gotcha.
Right. And so proportionally, it's never good to look at those numbers, especially if they're low, because, like, again, you'll only have 19, 20. I think it's best to take a radical diversity perspective and look at the numbers. Like, out of 24,000, there's only 19. How can we increase that? Right? Not looking just based on 2% and then, we're matching that with our 2%. Like, we have 24,000 black folks, right? Like, maybe we should have a goal as a fire department of having 100, right? Or just, so I think the diversity is needed, the equity, because it creates innovation, it creates thought, collaborative work, and it's going to be representative of the community that you are serving.
Come on, man. Thank you for saying that, because I was going to say, because of the nature of our job, we serve the community, right?
Yes, that's all.
So we should resemble
the
community we serve, because overall you get better outcomes. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I don't know. I don't do the work.
Hey, so we're still defining it. Do I have implicit biases?
We all do.
So even I do?
I'm sure you do.
I thought I was the most fair, balanced human being. Even I have implicit bias.
Look, man.
But so is it conscious or unconscious?
It could be both. It can be both. It's very complex, but a lot of times implicit bias is working unconsciously, right? And it's probably based on your socialization as a child, how you were raised, who were you around? Were you in a segregated home where you didn't grow up with indigenous people around? You didn't have no indigenous friends, or you know nothing? Were you in a very diverse community? So I think implicit bias can be unconscious and it can be conscious.
You know, that's an interesting concept. So, like, Emily shared with us that you were raised on a reservation, right?
Yes.
Around mainly natives.
Mm-hmm.
So what a lot of people would say is, because Emily was raised around Native Americans, she can't have biases against Native Americans, right? Don't people say that? Right? I had a black guy at my wedding.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
I can't be racist. Mm-hmm. So is it possible?
Native friends. So
right, you have Native friends, so then therefore, does it work like that?
Yeah, that's a good question. again, we have to, I think, have a common understanding of the term, what is racism? What is bigotry? What's discrimination? What is implicit bias, prejudice?
So with implicit bias, let me see if I understand it. These are preconceived ideas about someone based around stereotypes.
Absolutely.
May I
Please,
also
please.
add, even to take it into the context of the work that we do?
Yeah.
I think that we may have, as firefighters, implicit bias towards certain call types that we even run on, where the tones go off and you hear that you're responding to a 1 Alpha or a 26 Alpha or a 32 Bravo, 23 Bravo. You're going into that call, especially if it's a certain location
For the
where
audience,
you
can
know.
you give a little?
Sure. So certain call types are person down, sometimes referred to as a down and out. Those types of calls that we run a lot of, or our partners at Albuquerque Ambulance run a lot of. In certain districts, you might run to an address where you already know which patient you're going to find when you get there, and you already know their medical history. You already know what they probably had to drink for the day. And so you run into that call with implicit bias towards that patient unknowingly. And that can be dangerous also as we provide medical services, because maybe they are having a different type of medical emergency that day. And so I think that taking it even out of the context of what we're just discussing here with race and gender, I think that you can even take it into the work that we do.
So meaning I might treat somebody differently because I've seen you so many times and I just assume, oh, it's Charlie, he's just drunk, right? And then the level of service might not be as robust as it should be because I'm assuming I know what the problem is. So, but could we blame that on compassion fatigue?
So I think that's a good no. You can.
No, we can't say.
I don't know if you can. I'm not going to speak, but
it's an inside joke. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, and I don't want to derail the conversation too far away, but I think it's important to look at biases that we may have in all areas of our life, or maybe there's a population of individuals that we run on with a certain call type that cause those biases that bleed over to race. And I'll use an example that's very blunt, but growing up on the reservation, I did have most of my friends growing up were Navajo, because I grew up in an area where I was one of the few white people. So I have friends that after we graduated from college, had successful careers in the military. I have a friend that went on to become a physician. I have, teacher friends. These are all friends that are Navajo. That was my interaction with Navajos. Coming into this line of work and working in the fire department, I worked with people that their first interaction with a Native American was on a call type, on a down and out call type.
Right.
And so their perception of Native Americans was very different than mine, because I grew up seeing a different side, I don't really know how to put that into words, but that was their bias towards that.
Right.
Yeah.
The first time they met a Native American was might have been living up to their stereotype.
Exactly.
Compared to whereas you were able to humanize, because that's what discrimination is dehumanization. And you were able to humanize them because you lived next to them, you shared bread, breaking of bread, and culture and tradition. Yeah. Interesting.
Okay, so I think we've defined it.
I think so.
For most people. So we talked about why we need it, right? You helped us understand what it is. So let's dispel one more myth, and then we can go in a different direction.
Okay.
Is implicit bias just critical race theory in a different package?
I think it's a wonderful question. I hate to answer a question with a question, but I always,
Please do.
I say, as we build the analysis again, what is critical race theory? And a lot of people can't define it.
Right.
They can't define its origins. We know that it's been politicized.
Absolutely.
Absolutely, right. And now we also know it's being banned across the country.
Right.
And first and foremost, I think as members of a democracy, that should be concerning to us. Anytime that something that criticizes an institution of power, a nation state, somebody in power, and the response is to silence that and to ban that, red flag should go up across everybody in a democracy to say it's part of our basic, right, freedom of speech, right, freedom of assembly. When we start to play with that slippery slope, we're going down a dangerous place. We don't have to agree.
What they're saying is that we are indoctrinating the kids.
Yeah.
And that actually critical race theory enhances racism. And
because you talk about
or it's reverse racism.
Oh, yeah.
And that implicit bias is now just another angle of attack.
Right.
Right?
And then again, what is reverse racism? Right? And again, so I'm going to put a definition out here. You can agree to disagree or not. But if we define racism, right, as race prejudice plus power equals racism, that gives us a starting point. And when I say race prejudice, we're all prejudiced. We all have prejudices. Some people like the rain over the sun. That's your prejudice. And prejudices are natural. Those prejudices save you in fight or flight. You have to have the prejudice, right? Do I eat this? Do I not? It's when you add power, then you add the construct of race with that where it becomes problematic. Because now you're starting to create superiority and inferiority.
Okay, I was about to say, give me an example, because power is it's kind of a broad term. What do you mean?
So there's institutional power, but I think let's start with the formation of this country. We're gonna, we have to have the race and class analysis. When this country was formed, as I said, you have 1675, the foundation of Bacon's Rebellion. But in the Southwest, it's important to bring it home. In the 1500s, you have the encomiendo system, meaning communal slavery, right? You have the entradas come in the 1540s, and they start to colonize and take over indigenous lands, and then they put them into systems of slavery, right? Then you start to have blood mixture happening here. And then with that blood mixture, you have the castas system, which is a 600 classification system. It's a caste system, right? They say pelo bueno, pelo malo, pelo chino, right? That's just a saying that's a derivative of that caste system. And what that means is good hair, bad hair. And when I was a kid, I thought chino in Spanish meant of Chinese origin or descent. But what it means is it means cochino, which means dirty pig.
Right.
And what they would do is when you were born of mixed ancestry within that caste system, they would pull your hair down. And if it coiled back like a pig's, you were part of that caste system. You were put into that classification. And so I think it's really important as we continue that race is being evolved, the social construct, and then legislated both in the Southwest and in the East, right? And there's going to come a point where the East meets West, right? And this racial complexity even gets more complex. But I think it's just really important that we start from a historical analysis, if that makes sense.
It makes sense, but you're stirring the pot.
I didn't make up history. I was born into it.
Well, isn't that the misconception with critical race theory is that it's like you said, indoctrination, but in reality, it's just teaching true history.
Absolutely. And
there's no indoctrination in there. It's just teaching the reality of what our past is.
Absolutely. And I want to say this. It's important that when we're starting from history, we're establishing that there is anti-Black, anti-indigeneity sentiment across the country, right? Like, we have to remember that there was millions and millions of indigenous people here. This is a settler colonial society. Now they only make up 1.2% of the American population. Right? Like these are realities that we have to speak out, we have to name. But I do want to say that within the concept of education, Freddie has a term called banking education. And it's the idea, and it's not good, right? Where students come in and it's a top-down approach where we impart knowledge into their brain, right? And both sides are screaming, conservatives and liberals, right? That conservative education is banking education, and then liberal is a banking form of education. And I think it's really important, as, like I said, members of a democracy, to be critical thinkers and to understand the politicization behind these movements, and that there's something called sectarian influence, like basically those who control, right? A lot of people think they're capitalists, but they don't own any capital. Right? I'll just say you're probably a consumer. Until you own some capital, then you're a capitalist. Right? So But it's really important that we understand that there are interested powers and of different ideologies on different sides who have a political agenda, right? And so as you critically think through this, both the left and the right are left and right. It's a political, right? And so it's really important that we critically think through this and understand what banking education is, what people are arguing. But to go back to critical race theory, that is nothing more than teaching the true aspect and critically analyzing the institutions that have made it unfair for women, for Black people.
But what's being said is that this is a liberal construct that's used to, reward their constituents, right? Their voting base, right? And that's all it is. And that there's no legitimacy to it. You're dredging up the past, right?
Yeah.
And so it's kind of like, and now we have implicit bias. So this is just the back door of the same house. This is what they're saying.
Right, and even that term, the back door of the same house, I mean, Blacks couldn't go in the front door for many, many years.
That's true.
There's always the back door of the house. These are the type of truths that we need to say. Like, are we going to not say that Black people were enslaved for 250 years until 1865? Right?
It's a fact.
It's a fact. And then we have radical Reconstruction from 1865 to 1877, but that's when you see the rise of the KKK, the rise of black codes and Jim Crow. So as the country is trying to move forward and be democratic, there's literally a political organization around whiteness and a pushback of anti-Black laws. At the same time, Manifest Destiny is happening on the West, where indigenous people are being slaughtered and killed so that their land could be sold for a penny an acre. I mean, we can go to Denver, Colorado, and just look at those street names, right? And a lot of them say, been here 100 years, 150 years, or 120, 100 years, right? Because that's whenever they slaughtered the Utes in Colorado and then moved them out to Utah. That used to be their land. You can go down the main strip of Denver. So if we do not acknowledge our history, if we cannot as a country understand our collective liberation as Americans and what we have more in common rather than our differences, like I said, we're going down a slippery slope. And we have to understand history. We have to have a good historical analysis to understand that, yesterday was the 175th anniversary of the Treaty of Hidalgo, Guadalupe. And that literally, right, cut Mexico in half. They had to sell, and that's where you get the term, the border crossed us, we didn't cross the border.
Right.
But it created, again, more of that racial complexity when it comes to the caste system of who's considered an honorary white, considered who's not.
So that might explain the need or the validity of critical race theory. But I guess I'm trying to show, right, people make this conflation of, right, implicit bias with critical race theory. Yeah. I guess I'm trying to show how
it's different.
Maybe, I guess, if you needed to, you could tie them together. Right. But they're different.
They're absolutely different. And like I said, I would just be careful, I think, right now, and I would just tell everyone, be a critical thinker. Don't be politicized between this and that. Because what happens, what you're seeing is, who are the people being banned? They are Black authors, Black scholars, Latino authors, Latino scholars. Right? This is not just an attack on a discipline. Critical race theory started in law schools. To take a look at how law and legislation has institutionally impacted people of color, right? And then it evolved, right, into different critical race theory, Black crit, indigenous crit. And it's just an analytical tool for scholars to say, these are the problems in our society. How can we find the disparities in the problems and then find policies to push us forwards towards a more inclusive democracy? Like I said, I didn't write the Constitution, right? But those are some of the words in there. All men are created equal. Whether they wanted it or not, that's a promissory note. That means all men and women should be treated and created equal. We have this debate.
Gotcha. So because I want to ask you both a question. So how does that relate to this legislation, the R-2075? What is that? Because my understanding, the mayor, this was passed here in the city, and it says what?
Yeah, I think it's important, like you said, to give that context. After the lynching of George Floyd, there was national protests all over, around the world, as we know, right? And from there, the mayor with the community pushed to pass legislation to say we as a city are going to endorse anti-racist equitable practices. We are not going to continue with the status quo, and we're going to do our best to make it inclusive and democratic as possible.
So they acknowledged
Absolutely.
the need for this.
He was one of the only mayors, I believe, at the time to run on Black Lives Matter, which was very controversial, right? And again, this is all historic, you know. But yeah, in multiple speeches, City Council passed R2075, and the community was behind him. So yeah, this has been implemented, and the city's taken an approach, a step forward to be more progressive and inclusive.
I love that. And then from the fire administration side, there was no pushback, right? You said that you recognize, yeah, we need this training and probably have for a long time. And I think you and I were talking off camera, but some of your experiences here in the fire service, being one of the few women firefighters, and I think when you came in almost 20 years ago, there was even fewer. Did you experience discrimination?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. And we get, you know, I think if you talk to any of the female firefighters, you're going to hear different experiences because each of us has a different experience. I was very lucky coming in as a rookie. I was assigned at Station 4 with a bunch of veterans. And they took really good care of me my first couple of years before I moved on and did other things. But I think there's like also different types of discrimination that you are going to face being a female in a male dominated career. Some of it is, just overt, you know, like you and I have talked about like jokes and things that just go on at the station and how far is too far, and
right.
Everybody's boundaries are different. But I think there's also the more subtle things that you may not even recognize are actions of discrimination because they're so subtle. And that's where we start to get into that, conversation about structural constructs that we might have. You know, one of my favorite stories that a lot of people that have either taken a class from me or have talked to me about is preparing for an assessment center and having a battalion chief me run through my my fireground operations,
like
practicing for the assessment center, and completing all my benchmarks, getting really great feedback from him as far as my operational decisions that I made in that scenario. And the one piece of constructive feedback that I got from him was that I should deepen my voice to have a better command presence. And this is a couple days before my assessment center. And I mean, I clearly have a high voice. I don't make it this way. This is the voice I was born with. And I panicked because if anybody hears me speak in my deep voice, it sounds like I'm mocking people.
Sure.
Even if I'm angry, I don't deepen my voice. So I spoke with one of the battalion chiefs that was a mentor for me at the time and was like, hey, I just got this feedback. What do you think? Do I have issues with my command presence? And do I need to deepen my voice? And he was like, well, that's weird. Then you would sound like a woman trying to sound like a man.
Right.
And you're clearly a female. Like, just make good decisions and you're fine. And so I don't know that when I got that feedback from that battalion chief in that practice scenario, I don't know that he even necessarily meant that, you know, in a disrespectful way, but like those subtleties that, like, what if the people assessing me in my assessment center thought I didn't have good command presence because I didn't sound like everybody else that was testing at that time, because they all came in with deep voices and I came in with my high voice.
But that was his own bias.
That was his own bias.
He kind of projected it.
Yes.
But through your career, how much of this stuff has happened? And we've talked about some of the inappropriate, some of the overt stuff, right? But how much of that did you let go and not address, not say anything?
Yeah, and I think, everybody, again, I like to always remind everybody's experience is different. So I think, like, for myself coming up through the department, overwhelmingly I've had great experiences with most of the places I've been, but there have been instances where, whether it's crossing the line as far as something related to gender, me being a female, or being present where there's comments or jokes that cross the line related to race or any other area that we're talking about today, that you being the the minority in the room, the only female, there's a lot of pressure. So you know, coming into the department, like usually the questions that we get is how many females in the class? How are they doing? How are they? Are they going to be good? You don't get those questions about the men. And so coming out of the academy into the department, even in the academy, you automatically know you're going to have to work harder. It's a physical job. It's a demanding job. But also knowing that we have like a target on your back, because everybody is wondering, like sizing you up when you come out, and you have to work. I've talked to some of our female firefighters, coming out that everybody is going to ask, how are the females? How are they doing? And so you have to work a little bit extra harder because you're really setting your reputation. And so that on top of, if there is inappropriate actions that happen around you, you don't want to be known as, we can't work with her. I remember.
She's not one of the guys.
Right. Oh, I remember someone sitting me down and being like, if the women try to ask you to come to their Christmas party, really what it is they're going to give you a little black book, and they're going to want you to document everything that the guys are doing at the station. And we're a rookie firefighter. I'm like, oh my God, like that sounds awful. But those types of things, you're trying to fit in. You're obviously other from everybody else in that circumstance. And so the pressure of like speaking up if somebody takes it too far could be very difficult for you for your career, for the rest of the career, if you say something, because now you can't work with her. She can't take a joke. She can't be trusted. You let it go. Yeah.
I just want to honor what you're saying. And I think it just adds more depth to the analysis in our conversation because can I ask, what do y'all do as the fire department? So we have this old idea, right, this old portrait of the fire department that y'all are running through blazing buildings. I'm not saying you don't. Y'all some badasses. But nationally, only 4% of firefighters do that, and the other 70% are on medical calls dealing with responding to providing medical care. Is that something that AFR, would you say, is in the same realm?
So all of our employees are trained both as firefighters and as EMTs or paramedics.
Okay.
So every fire department looks a little bit different. What happened is with fire code and all of the historical things in the fire service, we work on the prevention side and the reactive side.
Okay.
So we've kind of put ourselves out of business a little bit on the fire side, where because of fire code and construction and education, smoke detectors, all of these different things, people having fire extinguishers in their homes, like we respond to less fires than we did at the inception of the fire service. So we've had to take on this emergency medical services side of the work. And so we do both. So you, as a firefighter with AFR, you have to be able to run into a burning building. You have to be able to pull a victim out of a fire if you find somebody. So it's a very physically demanding line of work. And I think that's one of the reasons, if we're speaking specific to gender, first of all, it's not a job you see a lot of women in. So as a young girl, it's not something that you aspire to be necessarily. But also the nature of the work, everybody in the fire service has to be able to do that job. There has to be, we can't scale the physical side of the job because you never know when you're going to have to meet that standard to be able to do that. So I think that that's one of the challenges that we have that's even maybe a little different for law enforcement, where it's their job can be physically demanding, but not the same rate as. And then we run about, just under 90% of our call volume is on the EMS side. And
medical. But because of those reasons that you were just describing, I've heard guys say women do not belong in the fire service for that reason, right? You probably heard it, maybe not directly, but talk around, right? And I think until 1950, Black people didn't belong in the fire service either.
And I think as we continue with this conversation, this analysis is important, right, to tie the fire department and to understand that the evolution of the fire department evolved with the social and legislative evolution of the country.
Interesting point.
Right. So segregated firehouses was the norm by law. Right. Women were not allowed in space by law. And so it's important that we just establish this. And what I'm getting at is like you said, the culture is so deep that, and the reason I ask what you all do, because it takes emotional intellectual compassion, and then a high level of compassion to administer medical care to those in need. Right? That compassion aspect is a stereotype associated with women. And so for me, I'm like, well, if you have to have the compassion, the intellectual, and the emotional, why are we still fixated on the strength and the bronze, especially if we're not running into the burning buildings? And I'm not saying that women don't have to physically do and shouldn't be able to, like you all are saying. But I do think it's like you said, the culture and how we look at things. Because if compassion and serving medical, there should probably be an outreach to more women if we're playing into that positive stereotype.
Well, I also think culturally, though, I think some of the guys would feel like a lady in the firehouse, now the boys can't be boys.
Oh.
Because...
What does that mean?
Frat house.
Hazing?
Man, you name it.
I pledged. I pledged probably in the last phase where you could get away legally with hazing.
Yeah.
And that's a whole can of worms.
It's a whole different thing. Yeah. But not just hazing, but being able to say whatever you want to say, horseplay around, whatever, right? I mean, they feel like, oh, wait a minute, we gotta watch what we're saying and doing because Emily's here.
So a level of accountability. Because maybe there was a culture that was pretty chauvinistic or paternal before a female showed up. Is that?
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I played sports. I grew up in a frat house, and I became the pariah because I kind of pushed back against that stuff. So I understand it. I know what it's like to play
remember
with
what
boys.
The country said when Donald Trump got caught on video? And remember what he called it? Locker room talk, right?
It's true.
That's how they excused it. So
exactly. And my thing is, I acknowledge it that it exists and it's true.
Yeah.
But again, what's the culture that you want within your fire department? Do you want that culture of patriarchy and chauvinism?
Well, it spills over into other things.
Spills over into the house.
Right.
Let's keep
and you're
it real.
supposed to be a good sport. So I know, and I rarely get personal on these podcasts because it's not about me, but I can share that when I first came in, there was a certain amount of hazing, but most of it was centered around how much abuse will you take?
Absolutely.
And most of it was directed 99% at my race.
It's the
how much you going to let us joke around about your race?
Absolutely.
Right. And if you're one of the boys,
you're going to let it slide.
Yeah, you'll play along.
Come on, man. It's all in jest.
Yeah, it's all in jest.
Well, and you and I have talked about that specifically, that's where this is why I believe this training is so important, is that, as the new recruit in the department, if you experience that, you're probably not going to be empowered to say something because of all the pressures that come with how we train and your role as that rookie.
Paramilitary structure.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's why I believe in this training so much, is that in my mind that a company officer or anybody on the crew, but I look at our company officers as we all know right from wrong. We all know we should know when someone's crossing the line, and for somebody in that room to say, this isn't okay, like this element of hazing is wrong, and to be able to have the tools to stand up to that so that it's not the individual who has the target on their back where they're trying to say, hey, I don't know how far we're going to be able to go with her. No, we can't go. She can't take a joke. You're not going to want to work with her. Have someone else in the room stand up for that person. And know how to have the tools to address that behavior that they know is inappropriate. Because some of the things that you and I have talked about specifically that they think we're both trying not to be too personal on this podcast are very egregious actions that when you tell them to someone, they're shocked that it happened.
They may even doubt or question if it really
did happen. Exactly. And someone in that room knew that it was wrong, but they didn't know how to speak up.
I'm so glad you said that. And so what I failed to let our audience know is that this will be a 3-part podcast. So because we have so much to talk about, but in the end, because people are going to say, well, what is this all for? What's it all about? Well, the outcome is this. We hope to leave you with tools.
Absolutely.
Those specific tools, right? So when you find yourself in that situation, whether it's at work or wherever in the world, right? Mr. Green here is going to give us some concrete tools to be able to use to address that kind of behavior, whether it's being directed at you or if you're a witness.
Absolutely.
Right?
Because that's part of what we're getting at, is to break that culture of silence. That's what I'm hearing, right? Is that whether it's intentional or not, the structure of paramilitary command, hierarchy of power, creates a culture of silence because certain individuals within those places of power are not speaking up or speaking out to say this is a safe environment for us all. Like, you know, and so, yeah.
Ooh, wait. Can I marinate on that one for a
yeah,
second?
absolutely.
Well, did you hear what you just said? You said, this is a safe environment for us all. And when you go to work, you expect to be safe.
Yeah,
you don't want to be targeted.
No.
Right?
No.
I've known firefighters, male and female, who got to the point where they didn't want to go to work. They would get like anxiety.
Yeah.
Going in.
Hostile work environment.
They're not safe at work.
Absolutely.
And so you're right. Those people in the power position, the lieutenant or the captain or whoever, that's their job, right? But maybe they didn't, and I'm not excusing anybody, but maybe they didn't have the tools.
And I think that's so important for us to discuss because we're very focused on this discussion related to race and gender, but this crosses over to beyond that to where we've had issues in fire stations with firefighters not treating other firefighters well, that actually were not even tied to race or gender, and bullying and, whatever word you want to use to describe it. But I think that not having those tools and that behavior being allowable is something that we want to try to empower everybody to be able to stand up, whether it's for themselves or for other people.
Now, let me ask you this, though, from the, you're here, so I got to pick on you a little bit. Now, what can be said, or what will be said is, okay, fine, you give me the tools, but admin has no teeth or claws. They ain't going to do nothing about it.
Yeah. I mean, it depends on where we're talking about that. I think this is why it's so important. And this is something that I've spoken with Tim about, that as an administration, we even look at our own policies and processes that we have, that how do we support people in an equitable and fair manner is very important. And the fire service is such a unique it's unique in so many good ways that we work together. They're our family.
Absolutely.
Like a third of your life, because of the way our schedules work, for 20 years or 25 years or more, you're living with
these
your
people.
coworkers.
Yeah.
You don't live with your coworkers in any other, short of like military deployments and things like that. And so you develop these different relationships with our coworkers, and like we're talking about like really specific areas. Like I've overwhelmingly been taken very good care of by a lot of my coworkers, but it doesn't mean that we can't still identify that there's a lot of areas that we need to improve. And that's where I think this is so important, because administration needs to support members that feel like there's not fair and equitable treatment out in the field or in the workplace. But that's our responsibility as administration, to make it fair for everybody.
But you're here for that reason, right? To not just say it, but to demonstrate. Because what's our new favorite word Mr. Green taught us? Performative. We don't just want to be performative and just check the box and just do it. So that's part of the reason why you're even on the podcast, to demonstrate.
Performative is easy but I think people are really starting to see through performative measures. Like it's really easy. I'll use Women's History Month as an example. It's really history to highlight a couple female firefighters during Women's History Month, but that's performative. So I think, the way that recruitment a lot of times happens is it's performative. It's, putting diverse faces onto a flyer to say, hey,
billboard,
join
right?
our department.
Yeah, we're
which
diverse.
Is important. Like you have to, like little girls have to see female firefighters to even realize that that's a career. Like I listened to a great podcast from a physician who talked about growing up. He's Native American. He thought you couldn't be a doctor if you were Native American because he had never seen a Native American physician. So I think that representation is very important for people to see, like, hey, I'm a little girl, but I could be a firefighter. So I think that's important, but the performative nature of that is that doesn't include how we recruit and how we retain and get people to come and want to work for us.
Come and want to work.
And that's where the real important work is not to just be performative.
But also and I'm saying this for the benefit of our members, right? So if whoever's watching this, for them to know it's not performative. Like let's say a current employee, right? That from the top down, the mayor's office, because it's right here, right? And then Miss Emily's here to demonstrate that efforts are being made to change that system.
We could have done this much easier by putting together a target solutions assignment that checks the box for the mayor's office, that educates everybody on what the directive of this was, and whether or not they completed the training or not, we'll never know because they checked the box and they said it was completed, and we could fulfill the mission of the mayor on paper. But in my core, I believe that this information and this training will make us, I think it'll make us more connected as the fire family if we can do it in a way that's very, like, with a lot of intention and other goals than just checking that box.
Really appreciate that.
And I just want to speak to that because I think it goes to what you said, right? Right now, equity, anti-racist work has been politicized. Okay, you say the word EDI, equity, diversity, and inclusion, right, out the door. And I think there's some truth to that because what has happened is institutions, multinational corporations have been so performative in trying to force EDI down people's throats, right? Because it's going to affect their bottom dollar. But what they're doing is they're not getting people qualified to do this. They're just getting any black or brown person to come on in. Some people more skilled than others. And you have to remember racism, it works racial superiority for whites, but it racial inferiority for people of color. And so when you get somebody who hasn't dealt with their own baggage in terms of racial inferiority, trying to go in to a group of white folks and teach them, there might be a lot of pain and anger and trauma coming out. And so they're not giving them a good analysis. They're not bringing people to the table to say, let's really talk about this, right? It's usually, you're wrong. Racism's real.
The emotion is
the emotion.
Yeah,
and I'm not saying the emotion is, it's very real. But until you can unpack your own, how can you even have a conversation to bring others to the table? And so I want to honor and say that EDI industry, that is going on. And it's important that we understand within AFR that we're doing the interpersonal trainings around implicit bias and all this stuff and giving people the tools. But then there's the structural aspect where we're going to, like you said, look at the policies to say, how do we make this more inclusive? How do we make it better for everyone? And I just wanted to put that out there because radical diversity is going to, like I said, allow for innovative collaboration. It's going to allow for you all to have better outreach with the communities that you serve, right? The International District is one of the fastest growing districts in terms of diversity and language that we know, and I would argue in the country, right? You need that. You need to understand. You need to have people who can connect with the community because that's what y'all do. Y'all are in the community more than anybody.
But even you spoke on internally here in AFR, and you and I were talking one day, and I asked you, I think we were addressing like structural implements that would like pay women less, pay blacks less or whatever. Mm-hmm. And I was telling Emily one day that, well, we don't have that problem, right? Because a female captain makes the same as a male captain. But what she educated me on and kind of showed me a different perspective, your pay is affected in the aspect of job assignment. A woman could be overlooked, right? Like especially when you get to the battalion chief level, the only movement from there is like, what's it called? You have to be selected to be a deputy chief. You don't test. So is it possible that a woman is overlooked in those leadership positions?
You know, and I think that's an important thing that we have to analyze within our department. And we had, I was telling Tim before we started recording, during the Battalion Chief Assessment Center, I really started to think about like, and my own experience, you know, with the whole deep in your voice thing. But like, does those biases that somebody might hold impact the decision to put somebody into a position, especially if they don't know that they're there? And I have to say, like, speaking with iOS, and I'm just speaking very specific to like currently how we're promoting, at least up through the rank of battalion chief. The director was he pays a lot of attention to bias. And so he trains all of his assessors prior to coming out. And I was very pleased with how diverse his group of assessors were for our Battalion Chiefs Assessment Center. So I think that in general, I think we're doing better than I thought we were when I started thinking about this 6 months ago after speaking with Tim. So I think we're in a better place. And then, once you make battalion chief, then it's, that the decision is kind of out of our hands as far as like
Sure.
that goes to our leadership at the city, and how selection is made there.
But now, the argument could be made, and it's going to be said, right, Tim? They're going to say, this is a meritocracy. So you only get what you earn, and that trumps diversity, right? Because in trying to be diverse, maybe we put people in because that's our first priority as opposed to qualifications, right? We've heard this argument, right? Mm-hmm. You're going to put somebody unqualified in just to check the diversity box.
Right.
Mm-hmm. We saw that.
Oh, I had to deal with that when I got promoted. So
right,
yeah,
because that
affirmative action.
There hadn't been a female deputy chief, and everybody knew Mayor Keller coming in. He came in. He, like you talked about his campaigning. Everyone knew that he was coming in, like promoting diversity and things like that and inclusion. And so I had to deal with a lot of like people wondering if
she didn't deserve that. She didn't earn that. She didn't qualify for that.
He needed to have a female. There was not a lot of us that were qualified at the time to go to that rank, without really knowing my work history, people that didn't know me. And so, we go back to that, the implicit bias. Like it wasn't people that I would consider that, it was, I don't think it was meant in a negative way towards me, but well,
it's not a compliment.
But it's not a compliment because you would like to, and I had to look at it. When Chief Dow and I had that conversation, that was something that I brought up. I asked
yourself.
him. I did.
What's that called? When you internalize other people's biases, like, am I qualified? Should I be in this position?
Imposter syndrome.
Imposter syndrome. Right.
It's an inferiority complex.
Inferiority complex.
Right, but it's better imposter syndrome because you're doubting yourself. You're like, I'm an imposter. I don't deserve this. Right. Even though you've been promoted to the rank and it's obvious that other people think you do.
Yeah.
There's a culture or there's people saying things, right, that make you question your own ability and stuff.
Does that happen? Maybe let's say a young, people are going to get triggered. A young black firefighter goes into a fire station. He or she is a rookie, and you accept whatever abuse because you figure, well, that's my role in society. I don't have power, so I have to accept this because, right?
I can't. And I can't speak for all black folks, right?
And neither can I for the audience,
course,
right?
Yeah.
We're not trying to.
Yeah, we're not trying to do that, but it's a good question, and I think absolutely if we're taking an analysis of this, inferiority complex happens. Frantz Fanon says it happens at birth, and the people I'm saying are banned. I just want to say like Frantz Fanon, Derek Bell, all the people that they're banned all across the nation, right? But I think it's really important to understand that they have something really important to say, right, from a minority perspective. And so Frantz Fanon says that racial identity is formed when you're a child, and usually through trauma, right? And then you grow with those traumas and that development, and it creates a state of neurosis, right, which is also a semi-state of psychosis, right, depression and everything brought on by outside forces.
Yeah.
And so I think, and you have labeling theory. So we'll go back to the shark. If you're black in this country, it's anti-history, it's anti-black history. Everything you see on TV and hear is to be criminalizing black men or saying something about your peoples. It's called labeling theory. If you're told you're a thug, if you're told you're poor or this, that's what you take on as a child.
That's kind of what I was talking about. And
Absolutely.
If there was a hint of that in your situation, you know what I mean?
Yeah, if you
start to internalize
absolutely.
that talk. Like,
it's called labeling theory.
Well, and I think the other thing too is for somebody that is qualified for a position to have that stigma associated with achieving something professionally, that you're always going to have an asterisk, that there are people that will think that you got to where you're at because of your gender or your race. Right. And you can look at any social media post for a fire chief across the country. If it's a young female, there will be a lot of comments about how she looks. But there'll also be comments about, well, she must have got, why she got to where she got.
Yeah.
Same thing if you look at a fire chief, if you follow like fire engineering and they post a black fire chief that gets selected, there's going to be commentary underneath from
affirmative action.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
That's the only reason he got there.
Yeah,
Right.
and so
You're
I
not as
think
good.
right, and so I think that's hard for people in leadership roles. That I think you almost just have to acknowledge it, and then for me, I just let a lot of that stuff go. Like I feel like I always try to say like somebody's body of work accompanies them, and so think what you want about why somebody gets into that position, but their body of work is really what's going to speak for them.
But a lot of times what we experience is a lot of times your race precedes you before they ever even see the body of work.
If I walk into a meeting,
You're a woman first.
I mean you can't say like if I walk into a meeting, people are going to see that I'm a woman. If you walk into a meeting, people are going to see that you're black.
Yeah.
I think you acknowledge that. But I think the interesting thing about that is, like if I go to a meeting with my battalion chief who's a male, and we work together. He's my direct report. People that don't know how we interact, because we all call each other chiefs, they automatically a lot of times think that he is my boss versus the other way around. And we joke about it all the time, but that goes back to those assumptions that are made in those scenarios.
Is that connected to implicit bias?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Come on, man. We know we live in a gendered world. James Brown said this is a man's world.
But he also said it would be nothing
without a woman or a girl.
Yeah.
And then he proceeds to talk about the elements of patriarchy within society. Man built the road.
Right. Man,
but it wouldn't be
civilized the
nothing
world
without a woman. So we know we live in a sexist. I mean, come on. Locker talk, boys talk. I mean, So
I guess what I'm trying to get to, and we're getting close here. I guess what I'm trying to get at is that so what we're really dealing with, especially in a firehouse, are interpersonal relationships.
Absolutely. Interpersonal, intercultural communication.
Intercultural. So who are we as a fire department or a city government to mediate in a firehouse between what you and I talk about at the kitchen table? And is it even possible? Right? Because it's almost a sacred space. Right, that's the way we treat it.
It's way more sacred than any other workplace that you can think of, because if you just go to work, whether you're an educator, if you just go to work and work in your office, your cubicle, your engagement with your coworkers is different. We not only sit around the kitchen table and eat together, but we go through extremely traumatic events together as firefighters.
Right. You need each other.
That's right.
You have this bond with people, and that's why I think we're talking about all these like tough conversation, or these are all like really like specific things that we need to address. But in general, like I think embracing like that family community that we have is where I have a lot of hope that I think we can make progress because of that.
And I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I got to jump in on that because. So with that being said, all that we share, and for the most part, we take care of each other, is a conversation like this going to mess up those relationships? Because I can hear the guys now in the back of my head saying, we work this out amongst ourselves, right? Now you're going to insert this artificial thing, and now we can't be real because there's this weird contract separating you and I now. So now we can't have a real conversation because I'm being scrutinized, right? It's not real anymore.
And I think that's very likely going to be a lot of people's reaction to this. But I think that self-analysis is so important to look at yourself in that. And I think our whenever anybody challenges your ideas and your beliefs, we automatically get into defensive mode, because we as a fire service, as a department, we do a very good job treating the public. We treat the public fairly.
Absolutely.
We're not under the radar for treating certain communities differently. If you go into cardiac arrest, you're going to get state-of-the-art treatment from our firefighters, regardless of all of the other issues. So I think that that's where people get defensive, because they're like, they don't, and I think so. That's why I think the self-analysis is so important. And I kind of equate it to like, it's easy to have workplace diversity and inclusion. And I shouldn't say easy. It's not easy, but take that training now and insert it at Thanksgiving dinner with your family that you love. And you've got your racist uncle that everybody loves. And now you're trying to have that conversation in that context, because I think, the performative side of the training is easy to me in an office culture. I think to actually get people to have that self-analysis and bring their defenses down and admit to everything is a challenge. But I think it's really important to create a safe culture for everybody to work in. And I
like that piece, which in my mind, it's what makes it necessary, right? Because when you just said that about the uncle, so the equivalent would be the federal government coming into that house and sitting down and telling the family, this is what you're going to do to help your uncle get through this. And people are going to go, you know what? He's our uncle, okay? I don't need the government, anybody else telling me how to.
We're going to take care of our uncle.
We're going to take care of our uncle. So in the same way with the fire station, the guy's going to say, I don't need Tim Green or John McGee or Emily Jaramillo coming in and telling me how to talk to my coworker that I've been through tremendous trauma with, right? The other 3 years or whatever. I don't need you to tell me. So that's a interesting.
Absolutely. And let me just speak to that before we end. I think I want to honor everything that's been said and say that you all are dealing with a legacy of dehumanization, not only across the country when it comes to BIPOC people and different people throughout history and time, but within the fire department. That's just up first and foremost. We can look at the narratives. We had some today. There's a level of dehumanization. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to rehumanize people, right, within this space. And so I just want to put that out there. Again, speaking to meritocracy, that's an interesting argument because if we look at the definition of meritocracy and you earn what you get, it hasn't always been equal. And we know that certain races and classes have earned more. So if we look at the welfare state, we know that after World War in World War II, Black people, they didn't get Social Security. They didn't get workforce bailout like a lot of white men did, right? They didn't get the GI Bill. Mama, your mama, aunties, and uncles, especially in the Latino community and the Black community, they were house servants. Those people were not guaranteed Social Security. So they lost out on all those benefits. And so when we talk about meritocracy and the welfare state and benefits, we really have to do a deep dive analysis because the idea that, this has been an equal-based country along legislation, policies is a farce, right? And again, I can identify a lot more policies, right, where it's not. We can just look at immigration.
But can I push back a little bit?
Absolutely.
But here in the fire service, because we're structured as a military setup, we're protected against that because you test for rank. If you pass that test, nobody can tell you can't be promoted based on gender, class, race, what have you. So doesn't that protect us against this anti-meritocracy, right?
I guess, but if you only have 19 Black folks and only one of them applies for the position, is that really equal? Is that real equity?
No, I'm not arguing that. I'm just hearing, because we've had this talk before where people are going to say, hey, man, you have as much opportunity. What do they say? Fair means I'm guaranteeing you an opportunity, but not an outcome.
Of course.
So they're going to say, if you'd studied harder, you would have promoted faster, been higher on that list. But you've been granted the opportunity like everybody else. But what Emily helped me see the other day was that it can be a little bit more subtle.
Absolutely.
Right? Because the broad things, like a paramedic lieutenant like me, he's going to make the same pay as me. Doesn't matter, or woman, doesn't matter, right? So we're protected against that. But there are other ways that I guess discrimination can be exercised.
Absolutely.
Even within that framework.
Well, and I think it goes all the way back to our hiring processes really when you look at like the start of the opportunities that people have. And we at one point had a requirement that you had to have, was it 15 credit hours?
College credit hours.
And in meetings that I was in, the discussion was, well, in this day and age, you go to any high school, you have the opportunity, because we lowered the age to 18. And so now we're talking about high school graduates. And so the idea was, well, if you're a real go-getter as a high schooler and you've taken some college credits as a high schooler, we could bring you in at 18. And all the comment was like, all the high schools offer this. And I was like, well, I don't think that's really the case. Like, and we're maybe, and also in Albuquerque, there's a whole lot more that's offered to students in Albuquerque versus where I grew up in Theroux. Like the opportunity isn't there for the same 18-year-old, depending on where you're coming from.
Absolutely.
And so I think that to talk about, absolutely promoting up through our department. There's so many opportunities that we give people to join committees and to work with professional development and to get certifications, that all are things that contribute also to your resume, not only to our department. Those are all pretty fair, but are some of these other areas, are we limiting people's access to be able to even get into our processes?
That's a great point. I also think it's a good point for us to end part one. I think part two, we can pick up on that, right? About how we hire and some of the processes, how we get here from school, because I think you're going to bring a historical context on this next one, right?
Absolutely.
So everybody, appreciate you watching. I encourage you guys to use the comment section. I read all the comments. I forward the good ones. I was tempted to delete the negative comments, but I decided to leave those in and give people a choice of how they feel about that. So, yeah, please use the comment section. For our AFR members, we definitely need your feedback on this. This is formal training. So at the end, you guys are going to get concrete tools. It's not just going to be a conversation. You will get that. But we'll see you guys here on part two. Thanks for watching.